Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Blender tutorial where today we're going to be talking about iridescence. Number one question is, what the is iridescence? And number two is, how the do we make it? So, first of all, iridescence is that thing when you look at a shiny piece of metal and you see the color swirling around. By the way, I'm getting my cast off tomorrow, just a thing. And the color swirling around it and all this, or maybe you look at the ground and you see a gasoline spill and you see those swirly things, or a soap bubble, or any of these things. That is what iridescence is. I think those are all correct examples. I'm going to be talking about how to do that kind of thing procedurally in a material. So this is what we're going to be making. Here's a nice little iridescent material. You could apply it to a cloth, you could apply it to a sphere, or you could apply it to Suzanne the monkey. So let's talk about how to make this material. It's super easy, and I'm actually going to bundle two tutorials into one. That's right. I'm also going to be showing you how to make that scene with the cloth and all that, because we need to set it up. So buy one, get one free, but really, it's me being too lazy to set it up. So what am I doing here? I'm just switching to Cycles. These are just basic render settings that I'm setting up for this. So I'm going to be using Cycles render engine without the light, because instead I want to use a environment texture HDRI. This is actually very important, because if it's going to be a metallic reflective thing, we best have an HDRI to reflect. So I've loaded an HDRI environment. Other than this, I think only other thing is I'm just going to enable film transparent. That makes the HDRI invisible, and now let's set up the scene, okay? To do this, you take a plane, you make it a big plane, you go into edit mode, select these two edges. I've just selected any two edges that are adjacent to each other. E for extrude, Z for the Z axis, and now we have a corner. What I like to do with this is I select the three, ones that are touching the corner, Control B to bevel, scroll up to make it a smooth bevel, shade smooth, boom. This is an easy way to make a nice little render wallpaper studio for whatever it is you're making, okay? Cool. Now for the models, I'm going to use a sphere as one of them. Maybe this is the kind of thing that's easier to do in solid view. Yeah. I'm going to use a sphere, Control 1 to add a subsurf of level 1, so Control 1, level 1, or you could instead do Control 2, whatever. This is an iridescent tutorial. Let's move on. Sphere, I'm also going to add in a monkey somewhere. This one's also going to be shade smoothed and subdivided and all this, so boom, we have a monkey, position it somewhere else, and then finally for the cloth, just a simple simulation. And this is just all to illustrate that this effect is not UV map dependent or anything. It's completely dependent on, I think, generated coordinates is the only thing we're going to be using. So take a plane, subdivide it. To make it a cloth, go to the physics, make it a cloth physics, and for the things that it's going to hit, so I expect it to hit the sphere and this wallpaper going down, you select those and you make them collision physics objects. So now when we play it, boom, we get cloth. And I think I'm happy with it here. So when you're happy with it, go to the modifiers, apply it, subsurf, boom. I feel like, has it been like years since I began recording? I feel like it's been a long time. Let's get to the iridescent part. So here we have our basic scene with the models and whatever. Iridescent material. Go to the shading workspace. In the shading workspace, I'm going to make a material for the cloth. I'm just going to call it I have a Patreon, because this is going to be available on Patreon. You don't need to make it yourself. Check it out over there, link in the description. And for this material, which you can see I can edit, I'm just going to make sure that the other two objects, you just shift-click them. You can have them have the same material super fast by shift-clicking the main thing, so it's the active. So I have all my objects, and then this is the active one, the cloth. Control L to link the materials. And that's going to make it so that they all have not just the same material, but the same instance of it. So we can edit all of them. Okay, cool. To make this thing look good, here's what we're going to do. First of all, it needs to be metallic before we do the color thing. So take the metal, bring it up. Now you can see it's a metallic material. Additionally, the roughness, maybe bring that down. That's going to make it shinier, less surface imperfections. And basically, you're making it less rough so it's shinier, so it looks more like metal. That's kind of the essence of our metal material. And now let's do the iridescent part of it, which is actually just going to be modifying this color. Because you can see when we change the color, it's almost like we're doing this iridescent thing globally, both only a single color. So to get a bunch of different colors, here's what I would recommend. You can use a layer weight node using either Fresnel or facing. I think I'm going to be using facing. These are both angle, viewport dependent effects. What I'm trying to say is if I change the way I'm looking at this, you can see this black. it's traveling across the surface. So it actually changes depending on where you look at it, and it has to do with surface normals and all this, which is kind of how iridescent materials behave, kind of. Again, this isn't physically accurate. We're just doing an artistic interpretation. Take a layer weight node. What we're going to do is we're going to use this to drive the coloring. So I'm just going to filter this through a color ramp, and if we were to select two colors, so one of them can be bright red, one of them can be bright blue, you can see now we have kind of the basics of a material that is dynamic and changes on the fly. Of course, if it's iridescent, we want, I think, all the colors. I think it accesses the entire visible spectrum. So just add in a couple more handles. Each one of these is going to be a color. Distribute these evenly. There's a function for that, and now we just go down. So the first one's going to be red. The next one's going to be what's after red. It's going to be orange, just doing the Roy G. Biv. So this one's going to be yellow, green. I guess ideally you want to distribute them equally along the color wheel. I, however, am not going to do too good of a job at that. There you go. Now we have a color kind of thing going on. You take this, you connect it to the base color, you view it, and you can see that is kind of what we're trying to get. That is the iridescent material. There are a couple caveats, though, and things we can do to make it look better, and I will show you how to do that. But you can see this is the basic of an iridescent material. Before I start adding in detail and the swirls that you'd see in the gasoline, and just so it doesn't look so plain, I just want to make it look less intense. Here's how you do that. You mix RGB. So we're going to take all this color information and mix it. With what color? With the base color, which is this white. So Control-C, Control-V to paste it. And now you can see we're kind of blending the two. Some dude's riding a motorcycle out there. Very cool guy. And there he is doing it again. I'm told you can never hear any of the things that I'm like, oh, there's clicking, there's motorcycles. You can't hear it because the microphone's right fucking here, and I always forget that. So this mixing, what it does is when it's 1, it's going to give us the bottom output. When it's 0, it's going to give us the top output. So when it's somewhere in between, it's going to make it look less intense because we're going in between the basic metal color and this one. Okay, so that's intensity. For now, I'm just going to make it fully opaque. For now, let's make it look even cooler. So what makes iridescence look cool is not only the colors, but the swirling and all this. In other words, we need to add in some randomness. And whenever I do this, I always add in noise texture. By the way, these node previews, if you're curious, by the way, Control-Shift-P to enable, disable. There's a link in the description. It's an add-on. It's just useful for explaining stuff. Don't worry about it. So this noise texture is just going to be a source of randomness. We can change what it looks like and do a whole bunch of stuff. But long story short, if we mix this with the facing effect, that again is what is driving this entire thing. If we mix these together, they should they should alter the colors and all this going down the chain. So just like before, we're going to use a mix RGB to incorporate these two things together. So think of this as facing incorporated with a source of randomness. I like to set this to linear light. In this case, it happens to not matter too much. But you can see what this is going to do is it's basically going to take our facing and just add in a bit of randomness. The fact that there's color here isn't too relevant because it's going to go back to a float input. It just rips the red channel of this RGB. You could have equally just used factor. It doesn't matter too much. But you can see this is just going to add in a bit of randomness to this as we mix them together. So when you look at it here, that is going to alter the colors. So here's the after and the before. You can see there's red seeping in where there shouldn't and all this kind of fun stuff. Where this gets interesting is what is the quality of our randomness? Well, I want it to be very detailed randomness. Maybe that isn't technically what you should be doing, but whatever. So now it's nice and detailed as opposed to very blobular. I'm also going to add some distortion. This is what's going to add in the swirls. This is arguably the most important part. And you can do a couple other things. But in general, when we preview this now, this is what's going to give it that nice, like, grease, oily kind of thing. And you can change the scale of that. So what's the magnitude of that effect, etc. But all of this still works as you change your thing through the viewport. Important thing to note, facing is a viewport-driven effect, so as we change, the angle actually matters. Noise texture isn't, because it's using generated coordinates. If you want this to change as well as we're moving along, just use something like windowed coordinates. And that's going to make, so if we just preview this noise texture, it moves like on the mesh. I mean, it looks static, but on the mesh it moves. Whereas something like generated, you can see it sticks onto here. That's just a tiny caveat. caveat. That's a hard word to say. So I'm going to mix these halfway in between, so again, it's less intense. And now you can see we have a very cool iridescent shader. Again, you add in any mesh, whether it be a cylinder, something with, something without a UV map. You apply the I have a Patreon material, shade smooth, and also make sure the normals don't look absolutely blasted, and now you have a nice little iridescent material. By the way, tiny preview for those of you who care, if you want to make a super accurate kind of thing, I don't know if it's much more accurate than this, consider using the tangent coordinate system that nobody ever talks about because it's weird. That's another way to do this. I'm not going to talk about it for this video, but if you want me to, let me know and I will. So there you have it, iridescent material explained in 10 minutes for some reason. But now you understand the full thing about it, and it's not just nodes, and then you don't know what's going on. Either way, thank you for watching. That was a weak slam. There we go. Thank you for watching this tutorial. This is the part of the tutorial where I sniffle and try to thank all 780, I think at this point, some patrons that are supporting both this channel and the very dead CG Matter channel. Thank you, patrons. If you want to join Patreon, this is the pitch that I have for you. You get blend files like this one, but more importantly, any blend I've ever uploaded since I've created Patreon, which is a year or 2 years ago. You get access to hundreds, I think at this point, blends just for $5 a month. Additionally, depending on the tier, you also get exclusive tutorials. Those are tutorials I post to neither channel, but only to Patreon. This week, or last week, I made a tutorial about procedural lightning, so how do you make it using only math? A bit ridiculous, but that's why it's over on the Patreon channel. Patreon, only, you know what I'm trying to say. Whenever it gets a bit too in the weeds, I put it on Patreon. Those are the super advanced tutorials. Next week, I don't know what I'm going to be making. I'll figure it out when we get to it. Additionally, you get tutorials early. That's a big one. So if you wanted to see this video more than a day early, in this case, I think a couple days early, you coulda, and some people did. 780 people had the chance to. Either way, this is going on for too long. If you care, there's a link in the description, and if you don't, you have already clicked off. So, iridescent material, you now know how to make it, and thank you for picking my tutorial as the one to watch.